Good evening. I'm Dharmendra Gordon, and this is Vegan Synergy Meditation meeting number 22. Welcome to everybody here that's present, and also for those who will be listening to the recording later on YouTube. So I invite you now, whatever the case may be, to just take a moment and to disconnect from your day. And just kind of find yourself in your body, in your center, just in your own space. And just to help that a little bit, just become aware of whatever if your eyes are still open, just be aware of what's in your visual space. If your eyes are closed, just be aware of anything moving through your mental space. And also, if there are any sounds inside or outside of the space, or even inside your body, if you can hear anything there, if you're in a quiet space. And then just be aware of any sensations that might be in your body. Sensations of any kind, movement or heaviness, lightness, coolness, heat, vibration or numbness, whatever. Just whatever's there in your body. And just allow yourself to relax and be. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the life code we're going to be working with this evening, which is the 11th life code, which is about experiential realization. It takes time to absorb, digest, and process our experience. And it isn't until we have finally integrated it that we are at peace with it. When we are at peace with it, we can see it for what it is. And if it was a worthwhile experience, it can serve as the basis for an idea that when shared with others can also help them to come to terms with their own experience and find peace within it. This code is about seeing intuitively into our sensed and lived through experience, and the realizations connected with that come in waves over time. So we keep returning to it through recollection until all the pieces fit and make some kind of sense to us. And it is only then that we are at peace with it. At the shadow level, there are still many aspects of an experience that have not been seen and fully digested. It is the state of obfuscation. As a result, the meaning remains obscure and unintelligible, as if partially immersed in darkness. If there is no desire or inclination to make sense out of life, then going through life without any deep reflection is the order of the day, and there most likely is very little awareness of the depth of obfuscation covering the clear recollection of one's passage on this earth. There may even be a very superficial and hence false sense of peace that has been artificially constructed and plastered over most of one's experience that allows one to continue through life oblivious to the richness it contains. Even if such a life is examined, at least in relation to oneself, there is still so much to explore that remains veiled to such an individual. A life lived from the egoic perspective is only interested in realizing that which agrees with what supports its falsely constructed sense of self, and the whole of this process proceeds mostly at an unconscious level, so that the person is not even aware of it. In fact, the ego can only function in a state of incomplete or partial awareness, as once an individual brings the total focus of their awareness on the ego, it immediately vanishes like the imaginary fantasy it actually is. Hence, the obfuscation is a function of that same partial or incomplete awareness. And since almost all humans are passing through a life ruled by ego, there is very little realization and resulting integration of life experience. So we have the world we live in at present ever so complete with that highly noticeable and ever-present absence of any kind of lasting peace whatsoever. At the gift level, we share, compare, and evaluate our experiences for a variety of different reasons, but in the end, only that which serves our complete realization and gives us some sense of fulfillment will come to be valued as a useful way of seeing our experience. When our experience can be viewed in the light of the collective, not only are we enriched by the variety of perspectives, but we are made aware of the world of the archetypes, which is that storehouse of images made available to and in service of the collective memory. Anytime we share similar experiences together, we are not only contributing to that collective memory, but also drawing from it at the same time, knowingly or unknowingly. At some point, we become aware that we are truly not alone, in the sense of the kinds of experience we are meant to go through in this life. We are more like all one in that way. Similarity of experience also serves as a bridge into others' worlds and helps us to widen our worldview as we cross that bridge. One of the greatest gifts of the expression of our genius in the sharing of our unique gifts is the natural ability we have to step into another's shoes and see life from a wholly diverse perspective. By and by, this entering into another's shoes helps us to fill out the gaps in the necessary and complete realizing of our own experience that is so important and necessary if we are to find and be at peace with ourselves, no matter what type of life experience we have been subject to. Ideas that arise through a deep and thorough understanding of our experience are meant to be shared and exchanged. The more an idea is shared, the more it impresses and becomes available to the collective consciousness field as an archetype, and as such becomes more readily accessible to all for the common good. Eventually, out of a situation such as this, as more and more individuals are able to arrive at true understanding, they will be empowered to extract what is most beneficial out of every experience, leading to arriving at a deepening sense of peace that expands throughout the collective, leading to the possibility of what could be perceived as an ideal society. And indeed it would be, as it would be composed of peaceful and realized souls. And although in this world we share such a although in this world such a society is only a fantasy, it is still a possibility, as there are a growing number of individuals to be found in various groupings throughout the world that put the concepts being discussed here into practice. With the Siddha, we arrive on the grounds of the universal playing field, to see that we exist in what appears to be a very peaceful universe, as the great heavenly bodies all move along in their orbits in the absence of conflict, in the harmony of the spheres, as it is said. What mysterious force is it that allows all this movement to occur with such superb and apparently effortless coordination? We can extend the idea of a collective storehouse of images to a universal storehouse of images. As we observe the greater world we exist in, we can observe a certain consistency in the way events occur, which lead to the idea that all these events are originating from a common cosmic source that oversees and regulates this. And as for this reality, there's the term light pictograph, which is an organized consciousness field of pure intent that conveys the kernel of a divine ideal that is responsible for the emanation of a certain aspect of the creation as a whole, and is available to function on all levels of that creation where it is applicable. Light in this sense, is the highest and most pure expression of an idea found in the universal mind that is meant to sustain some important functioning of the universe. And there are events happening at this scale that are the prime movers that are responsible for the sweeping changes that occur throughout all the scales upon which life exists on this planet, including humanity as a whole. As everything in existence is interconnected, it is possible at the highest frequencies of this life code to tune into these source-emanated light pictographs, whose design is that according to which events on a universal scale occur, and be moved through one's life in a way that is in complete harmony with these light pictographs. And as such an individual would be a living example as a role model of the divine ideal that represents any one of those light pictographs, and the result of which could and would contribute a great deal to the furthering of man's evolution and consequent upgrading of several aspects of his collective coexistence, and in an ever more peaceful manner. So, we're here in the 11th light code. It's about coming to a natural sort of peace that happens when you get through an experience and you kind of realize what it was all about, and it settles into you and becomes a part of your consciousness. And so at the shadow level, obfuscation, which is kind of like, to me, it's kind of like things are hidden behind shadows. It's like we're looking to understand an experience, and all the pieces aren't there yet. And whether all those pieces will be there at some point, it's hard to say, because a lot of uncovering of those pieces has to do with things that are out of our control. And that's why it's nice to have meetings like this in small groups, because sometimes another person in the group can help trigger something that gives a kind of a breakthrough, and a little bit of light goes through that coming from the siddha, breaks through that obscurity, that shadow, and leads to the gift of idealism. And idealism just means that you kind of captured the essence of what the experience was about, and what you have left is the most ideal part of it, the part of it that's going to serve you the most. That's what's meant by idealism in this sense. So for me, obscurity is kind of an interesting thing. This also functions, this particular gate in the life codes. It's connected with the left eye, with excuse me, with the left eye, and what's that? And the left eye sees in a way that's connected with the abstract, not the logical, which is the other side. It's more about the intuitive way of seeing, and that comes in waves. So when you see things in waves, it takes a while before the whole experience has been recollected. So even just with that alone, it takes a while. But like I was saying, an obscurity, when I look over the last week, because I always like to think of the last week and what kind of experiences I've been through, and is there anywhere. But what I see right now is a big cloud of obscurity that's being created by this COVID-19 virus. It's like there's all these different voices saying it's this, saying it's that, saying it's something else. It's you got to do this. You don't wear a mask. You wear a mask. You should stay at home. People are rebelling against staying at home. And what I see is there's really a division. There's really this divide and conquer thing, and it's because there's a lot of obscurity right now. There's not a whole lot of clarity in relation to what's going on with this, or where it came from, or its origin, or any of those kind of things. And so when I kind of feel into that ever-present kind of like overwhelming atmosphere of COVID-ness that's hovering over the whole planet right now, it's just a big mucky, murky kind of information field that for me, it's like just waiting to see how it's all going to turn out or work out. So in that sense, it's very difficult right now. It's really very obscure and obfuscated, and well, it's obscure because it's just not clear, but it's obfuscated because there are things getting in the way of it. There's not like one voice, and it's not like everybody's working toward the same aim, because there's a lot of political interests in there that are trying to distract it and pull it in different directions and make and funnel money in other ways. So it's kind of a very discombobulated, broken up sort of energy field. And it's just interesting to exist in that. I mean, for myself personally, I generally a pretty clear guy. So I'm kind of going into the collective this week in terms of how I'm experiencing this obscurity in relation to my fellow Earthlings I share the planet with. And it just seems kind of, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of irksome, I guess, in a way, to kind of let that energy in and go. It's just like weird, because there's this thing out there that's dangerous, and it's floating around, and it's taking people's lives, for that matter too, and lots of them. And yet we've just got politicians that are more interested in where their money's going, that has nothing to do with helping anybody. And so it's such a strange, I mean, it's really an incredible mirror right now for what's really going on. I mean, we see where people's priorities are when we have a real emergency, and then there's people who are running governments that don't could care less, and they're just farting around with other stuff in their own interests, and it's just and that's what makes it irksome, and makes it kind of brings up other shadows in me, that just a righteous indignation plus a whole lot of other expletives that I won't express right now, when it comes to just taking a look at this whole situation and just seeing how irresponsible some individuals at the head of certain governments, like our own, for instance, are being in relation to this, and just completely irresponsible with it. And so not only is it kind of getting that sense of obscure, but there's also a deep sense in my throat. There's a sense of a kind of there's just no communication. Communication isn't happening in the right way. It's all weird and distorted and zigzag and lying and broken up, and there's a lot of false stuff being put out by bots out there, the kind that elected our last so-called whatever you want to call him. He ain't my president, whatever he is, whatever that thing is in the White House. But anyway, so, and those kind of things are starting to put out weird messages about the COVID and spreading false stuff. So it's just really interesting, the world we're living in right now. So that's kind of how I'm going to open it up tonight. I'm just going to share the shadow that I'm being subject to through the collective right now in relation to the big shadow of the virus. And so I will go on mute now. Whoever else would like to share, either from your personal space or the collective, or however you like.
Hi. I mean, so shadow of obscurity. I would say, like some of the feelings in my body are pretty obscure. I've been going into deep meditations and discovering what's going on with me internally, and just so discovering that is like an underworld of darkness and obscurity that I wasn't paying attention to and I was afraid of. And as I meditate, I bring it into the light. And it's like pain, the pain body, and like post-traumatic stress disorder. So the muscles constantly firing off in fight, flight, or fright. And I was just living in that in my embodiment for most of my life, and since childhood. And then it just got worse and worse through society and through all the experiences, and like fight, flight, fright compounded on fight, flight, fright compounded on fight, flight, fright, whatever, all of that. I know, like I was the deer in the headlights for so long, like, when things really mean something to me, I'd be afraid to talk to people because I didn't trust them. And so my body would just give me all these signals, and they were obscure because I didn't really understand what they were, but they were pain. They were like cortisol running through my system. They were different chemicals. They weren't dopamine or serotonin, when they probably could have been if I, perceived it in another way. But that was the obscurity and the darkness, is not knowing how to deal with my own nervous system and my own experience of life due to how I coded it in childhood, and if maybe even previous lives. So yeah, it was, like reflexes that had my body in contraction, contracted all my muscles and my nerves, and then to the point to where I'm actually 2 inches shorter than I would naturally be if I didn't grow up being contracted. So the depth of like uncovering that shadow of experience of life in these days is like, I've been doing it for really deeply for 10 years now, the releasing of that, but I'm still doing it, and I'm still shorter than I'm supposed to be, but I'm also, older. And I believe that we don't need to have this pain or this obscurity within our bodies, and the darkness and unknown, and forgiveness and release and let go, and also knowing of other ways of being, such as what is the light side of the shadow of that experience. Like, I took me so long to discover that and to allow it to happen. So as much as there's this obscurity, I don't want to live in it. I don't want to repeat it. I don't want to remember it. And as of this full moon and this time in coronavirus, I've been really able to let go of those pains more and more, and I can finally feel bliss. I mean, I've been working on feeling bliss for a long time, but it used to just make me cry because I just didn't know how to do it. And I thought that, some people might help me with it, but they didn't. So I just sit here by myself, becoming aware of all the obscurity inside. And people help me, like, at a distance like this, but friends and people. But I was imagining, real tribal help or real community help, like, and that's what I would like to see for people. Anyway, that's enough of obscurity. I'll go into the gift and the light when we do.
Thank you, Denise. That reminds me of probably a couple of decades of obscurity and meditation. Thanks for the reminder. I don't get that anymore, but God, for the longest time. That's really a good point. If you're meditating, be prepared to face obscurity, especially as you go deep into your physical presence. There's going to be a lot of dark places, but there's also some good in that obscurity, because like a lot of when we go into the shadow, it's also connected in a positive way, actually, to our animal nature. And there are animals that survive, that their very survival depends on them being able to work with obscurity and stay in the shadows in intelligent ways, so they can survive from greater predators. So there's also actually positive benefits, and there really is, if you start to look at it from that perspective. In the animal world, there was a reason for all the shadows originally that actually served for survival purposes, or group cohesiveness, or any number of other things that animals depend on to maintain their existence. So I just wanted to throw that little side note in about animals and how we truly are connected through our shadows, and in a positive way. So there's not just the downside of our mental apparatus that tortures us with the shadows and focusing on the dysfunctional side of our genetic structure. There's also a positive and natural expression of all the shadows through the animal kingdom. So I just kind of want to bring that into the picture, so we start to become aware of that. That's also a possibility in the way we experience ourselves too, because there's a part of us when we go to sleep every night that goes into a design of an animal, and we literally, the genetics that's functioning when we're asleep is the same genetics as a mammal, and it's 15 gates instead of 64, so it's a much more simplified, and that's not the same as going into dreaming awake when you do it consciously. Then you're in a heightened state of your 64 gene keys. That's different. When you're asleep at night, laying down, and you're not conscious, that's when we're actually, our genetics, our energy body is basically functioning the same as a mammal. So we are deeply connected to animals. They are like a part of our, and that'll never go away. That'll just become integrated into who we are as human, and become the more we learn about it, the more we'll integrate it, and it will become part of who we are as our human expression that kind of extends us in a really unique and beautiful way. It's kind of our interface into nature in a very very down to earth and simple ways. So I just want to introduce that tonight because I haven't really brought that out yet, is that there's a very positive side to the shadows through the animal side of us, which we definitely have every time we go to bed at night. And it's there for a reason, and that will be revealed in the future, how that becomes a functional part of our humanness, because it's there. It's almost like we have a whole other body that we get to have as humans that we access when we go to sleep at night. But we can also access it now by starting to maybe perceive our shadows sometimes, because it's where our power is too. So that comes from the animal. So once we heal those shadows in the sense of releasing the mental hold on it, then that just becomes free energy that connects us into nature and the elements and all those kind of things. So I'll just throw that into, and that I was reminded of through meditation, because meditation also helps to, when you go into those obscure places in your body, it literally connects into different kind of mammalian forms and releases that energy and gives us access to whatever the shadow is there. But in this case, it's part of our animal nature, so it's more of a nature power, I guess you could say. All right, so that's who would like to share?
I'll share. So I guess this last past week, I've been doing some reflecting on this last fall. When I first met Jamin Shively, and my brother and I spent a couple days together, working together, and there was a lot involved in our experience there, and it was just like very unique, very very charged. There was a lot going on in my mind at the time, too much to unpack in that one weekend alone, and with that, there's been a lot of obscurity, uh, and so just glancing at the this like stockpile of memories, I I get overwhelmed with these feelings of obscurity when I look at it, and it just looks like a big tangled wire of like fishing string that I just I don't want to deal with. Um, but this last week I've been reflecting on it more, and kind of just like feeling all the feelings, all these general fears and worries about the world at large, really. And because I feel going into the future that um, the direction for humanity as a whole is kind of unclear and obscure at the moment, and yeah, there's like some dis-ease that comes with that, um, and then there's also some disappointment, and I guess just I'm generally a little bit bothered that about with how much lying goes on in the world, because I feel like my brain is constantly trying to determine whether something is true or false. I'm constantly trying to figure out, okay, is this source trying to deceive me in some way? Uh, which is fine in some circumstances when I'm trying to determine, okay, is something true for me? Yes, it's true, or no, it doesn't seem to be true for me. But when I'm dealing with people or uh, my community or my government, it's frustrating to not uh, have clear sight and be able to see a way forward. And right now, especially with all things going on with COVID-19, it does feel very obscure. Um, and I feel like what's coming to light out of this is that it's almost like we're shedding a light on the obscurity, and we're realizing how obscure it really is. We're like, oh, whoa, with all this corona going around, we're just realizing how confusing this whole system of rules and implication, or just this. There's a lot of clouds or a lot of fog, and that just brings a lot of feelings of general disease, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you, Evan. Well said. That was kind of a nice blend of some personal plus some collective. I enjoyed that. Thank you.
I just want to mention one thing on that is like Pluto is pretty big in the planetary, we're in orbit. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it's in Capricorn with Mercury, I think. So a lot of this underworld stuff is coming up for communication and realization right now, because Pluto is about death and rebirth and transformation, and also from the underworld experience. So it's up.
Oh, you're muted.
I said, so now you got me curious. I got to find out exactly what gate Pluto's in right now. So I got to look at the transit. I have to look at the transit field. I have I have something that can do that. So anyway, but whoever is wanting to go or share, don't mind me. That's just something I'll bring up at some point. History watch. Oh my God! So Pluto's in the gate of the inner truth. Wow, it's in the 61st gate in the fifth line, which means it's in the most powerful, positive expression of inner truth mystery right now. And isn't that weird? What we're all going through in the world right now. That's showing the inner truth. Pretty much, I think it's kind of happening. I mean, a lot in these Zoom meetings are an incredible way that the inner truth is coming out in people in sharing through these meetings. At least some people are using it that way, but the inner truth is coming out everywhere in our politics and all of it, and how they're handling the COVID. It's become the perfect catalyst to expose the inner truth of wherever everybody's at, whether that's good or not so good. It depends on, I guess, who you are and how much power or access to power you have, and if you're responsible for it or not. So it's interesting. I couldn't help myself. I had to look at the Pluto, what gate it's in. So yeah, deep and mysterious things
cool.
are. Yeah, that's called. Those are the transits. That's where that's where everything is right now in the gene keys, the human design gates, life codes, however you want to call it, and they're constantly moving. So. Anyway, for those of you listening later on YouTube. Nancy, do you have anything you would like to share this evening about obscurity that can benefit us all?
Hi, I feel a general brain fog, but mostly because my sleep pattern hasn't been what it needs to be. Just being home so much and not having much to do, and I'm working a lot behind the computer, so I'm just sort of just absorbing everything right now. And I've been feeding my cats, that's why I don't have the video on, and I just poured myself a little glass of wine. So I may become even more obscure really soon, I don't know. But I'm just fascinated by the conversation, and I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Well, yeah, the wine might actually even help you to to remove some of the obscurities. You never know. I know that in the times in my life when I do get into a mild enjoying of things like that, like wine or beer, usually in the first little bit of time, it makes the energy more interesting.
Well, it is a vegan wine. It's the only kind I'll have at home, and I rarely drink it. In fact, it's called Terra Viga. It's from Chile.
Wow.
It's a tiny little bottle. I bought these 4 little bottles. because I don't drink much wine, and I'll open up a bottle, and then I'll have a glass, and then it'll be maybe like months before I get back to it.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Wow.
Little bottles work nice, but it's nice. There are a lot of vegan wines if you look for
Cool. Yeah.
them.
Well, that would be the only kind I would drink if I were to drink any wine, which I'm not doing
Yeah.
these days, but when I do, that's what I do.
Well, it is
Or
a
would it?
toxin, and I can feel that. So I just ate a little to help absorb it, but I put some fruit juice in it too. So I have an obscure glass of wine as well. I obscured my wine with fruit juice.
Yeah. Cool. So thank you, Nancy. I kind of get that you're just pretty much the flow of the shadow at this point is with the obscurity. I think everybody's kind of feeling definitely the presence of the obscurity in the general atmosphere of things, which is interesting, especially since Pluto, which is all about the truth. It's all about the truth, and because it's the gate, it's the the planet of truth, and not only that, it's in the gate of the inner truth or the mystery being revealed, the 61st gate. So that's really interesting. And what's being revealed is there's a heck of a lot of obscurity, a heck of a lot of shadow in the world right now, and we see it all in how in an emergency when you would think everybody would be jumping to everybody's aid and or at least reaching out and breaking routines and connecting more or doing something different. Some people are holding on ever tighter and becoming even more closed down and more, especially leaders, which is really pitiful because they're the ones that control the resources and stuff. And it's messing a lot of stuff up. But because Pluto's in the inner truth right now, it's exposing that there's just an incredible amount of non-helpfulness from the people in power because of their extreme immaturity. And it's just such an upside down world we live in where leaders are like the most immature of the people in our society. And it's only because they're the most roguish and most violent. And so in a world like this, if you have money, it's easy to gather violent forces to shove your rules down people's throats and have it be backed by armed forces and the police and all that, unfortunately. And that's part of the obscure form of rulership that is being exposed to through this whole thing. So I think now would be a great time to shift, and thank you everybody for sharing your shadow and your relationship to it, to shift into the gift. On the other hand now, as far as idealism and the experiential realizations coming, I think I'm noticing there's a lot of pretty cool things about this strange COVID thing. For one of the things is just the ideal situation for doing these kind of connectings, these Zoom meetings, and it's like it's happening everywhere, all over the place, and schools are using it, and I mean, on TV shows, daytime shows, talk shows, everybody's using it now. So basically we found an ideal way of communicating no matter what, whether we can, be in the public or be in each other's presence or not. We're kind of transcending that limitation now. So that's kind of a cool, ideal result of all this. Another is just how quiet it is out there. And even going shopping is not so bad. You go shopping, there's hardly anybody there. You're not striving and struggling to get down the aisle because there's so many people, or when you're out driving and it's just so packed and you got to deal with that. And so there are some good things, and nature is coming back around more, and we're seeing more nature around it and all these kind of things. So it's interesting that as I take that obscurity and I take it into my heart, and I just realize that I don't have any choice, as always when I step into the gift, is that there's always two ways you can take something. You can either identify with the obscurity and just get bogged down, or you can totally absorb the obscurity and realize you couldn't possibly be the obscurity if you're able to watch it and witness it. Then you're not it, because it's not you if you can see it. And then what happens is that you take that in and with care and attention, you bring it into your heart. And you just kind of feel the world and feel that, you know, for the vast majority, it's really not anybody's fault. It's just people are asleep, and there's just apparently not a whole lot of consciousness to go around in a world like this for some strange reason or other. Who knows what that reason might be? But I guess I really count my blessings and my lucky stars, and feel incredibly blessed that I do have. Hey Tim, that I do have connection with you know, something that isn't so um, herd like, you know, and unconscious. So that's, I mean, not all of us. I think it's really a challenge sometimes to see what's ideal in a situation that's so where so much obscurity is coming up, because for the most part, you know. Yeah, you can just go ahead, enjoy yourself, and listen in for a bit, and you're always welcome. We're midway now. We've already worked through the shadow of the 11th gene key. I call them life codes, and I'm just starting out, and I'm always the one who leads. We're about to go through the gift, which is idealism. And so a lot of what we did in the obscurity, the shadow, was a lot to do with the world and just the obscurity that's going on in the world in response to the virus. And then Denise had mentioned something about Pluto and the position it's in, and Pluto's always about the inner, as a planet, it's about truth, and then it's in the 61st gate of the gene keys and the life codes, and that's about the inner mystery. So the inner mystery is being exposed in the sense that there's just so much obscurity being exposed right now, in the way different governments are responding and how many mixed messages we're getting. So as I stepped into my heart and out of my head, from the great troublemaker down into the place of compassion, which is what we do when we step into the gift, and I tune into idealism, I see a lot of beautiful things happening, one of which is the total increase and expansion of Zoom meetings, especially of this kind, where people get real and share real things together. And then also just how much more quiet it is, and how much more more clear the air is. Talk about the disappearance of obscurity, and the pollution that used to be in the air is so much less now. Nancy's raising her hand. Yes, Nancy, go ahead.
It was such a perfect to transfer to the gift, because when you were talking about how, you know, nature has come back because humanity has been indoors, I thought, I just had this image, you know, of like humanity just bulldozing just our very presence. Even people going into parks and just walking on streets and just doing what would seem to be normal it takes such a toll, such a beating on this world and on nature, and it obviously can't go on. And that's should be part of the lesson of COVID. And I think what would be a gift is if we could bring some of this into a new normal, where somehow in society you just figured a way to work it out so that, you know, people were home more, period. You know, maybe not have these massive events, like, you know, events that they just bailed out the cruise industry for billions of dollars, you know, just maybe let the cruise industry slide for a while, and just things that, you know, are daily pounding on this earth. I just think can't continue. And it seems also like this virus, I don't see it really going away. It's just made its way around the world like wildfire. And I don't know if there's anything, especially now with the, you know, there's never been this many people either. Like the 1918 pandemic, there probably was less than half of the people in the world that there is now. I don't know, but I was wondering what a gift it would be to us and the planet if we could bring some of what's happening now into a new normal, you know, for us to.
I think that's a really brilliant insight, and so we're going to step out of the usual form there, and I'm going to include that in what we're doing, because I think that's a really good point you're making, Nancy, is that I think nature in her own way, yes, it's a bit harsh, and it's kind of tough love, but that's what we need as a species right now, the human species, that's taken its toll, but at the same time, we're being shown some some possibilities of ways we could be, that would definitely be a step up from where we're coming from. That's for sure. So I think that's kind of, and I think that a significant portion of people are already headed pretty much well in that direction. And I think if we just keep making these kind of connections and keep supporting the space that's opening, and the fact that consciousness is accelerating collectively, and we keep finding ways to use these Zoom meetings in the most ideal way possible to start to share a lot of our ideas, because this is the gate of ideas, is what this is. This is the gate of ideas, and ideas come from our experience. And a lot of times, like Evan was saying, a lot of times we get a whole stack of stuff that's been unprocessed from certain experiences in our life. And now I think is the time is the ideal moment to start opening ourselves up and starting to let some of our realizations and start to share them with others, because who knows who might be benefited by it, and also to be open to others' realizations. So that's that was a really nice, I really like what you did there, Nancy. That kind of really enriched the gift space, and that's a nice way to start it and open it up. So I'm going to go silent if somebody else would like to share anything about, oh, and just before I do that, Tim, just so you know, when we do these meetings, we started at the first life code, and we're at the 11th now. And every week we just do so the next week will be the 12th life code. So that's how we work it here. And I'm sure that your 11th and your 61st gaze activated, you could tap into that to kind of tune into what we're talking about in the meeting tonight, which is about the 11th life code. But the 61st is the gate where Pluto's in right now, which is about the truth, because Pluto's about the truth. But and yes, that wouldn't hurt. But just so you know, the flow of the meetings is always we started at one weeks and weeks and weeks ago, and there were like 10 or 11 meetings before we even started doing these life codes. That's why this is the 22nd meeting. But so tonight we're doing the 11th life code, and like I say, the next will be the 12th. And so slowly moving, the idea is slowly eventually to move through all 64. So whoever participates in the meeting gets a chance. By sharing your shadow, your gift, and your siddha, you're basically activating, whether you have it defined or not, as the gene keys will tell you, and I'll tell you too through the life codes, is you don't have to have it activated or not. If you share it in a group situation like this, it's almost like an imprint, as powerful as if you were imprinted at birth, because of the magnification of the energies of everybody in the space. And especially if we're all supporting and agreeing, it multiplies it more than just the 5 we are. It's way more than that. So it's really valuable. And I've been working with this for quite a number of decades. So, and I've seen the results are very powerful when you get in a group scenario and you expose your shadow, and then you expose your gift, and then you expose your siddha. And nobody's under pressure, because you can also talk about the collective and how you're experiencing the shadow out there in the world, especially if the shadow or the gift or the siddha isn't impacting you personally directly. So that's just a little bit of info for you, Tim, so you can kind of feel a little bit more welcome and included in what we're doing here.
Awesome. Thank you for the context.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think I read the 11th gene key before, so I'm going to skim it real quick right now, but I don't really have it because it's big in my chart at least. So.
I could also, if you want, I could also share my screen and show you what I read at the beginning of the meeting. That's my take on it, that we're kind of using for how we're looking at it tonight. Because I kind of take whatever's in the gene keys, but I do my thing with it with the life codes, which is I'll just, I mean, and you can also whatever you want to do. But what I'll do is, while we're sharing here, I'll just throw the 11th. I'll just throw this 11 one up. I got to resize it a little bit so you can see the whole thing. And then if you want, you can have at, there it is. Now you can see it. You can have at reading what I did at the beginning of the meeting when I put it out there. Let me share my screen now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So there you go. There you go. If you want to check out what I wrote about it, it's number 11 there. And can you see all of it, or is you're able to move the pictures out of the way so you can see it, right?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. Great. All right. So anyway, I'm going on silence for whoever wants to share as we're stepping into the gift with a lot of help from Nancy there, who kind of set a really nice context, I think, for some possible ways of opening the vision of this gift in the present, in the
I can share a little bit. I mean, I did read this, the idealism, or what do you call it in your space?
I call it. I just I didn't. Sometimes I don't really care about changing it from the gene keys, and sometimes I do. If I was to name the gift level here, I would just call it experiential realization. What did you get out of your experience?
I really like the way you name it. I mean, I like both. I like both. I like it. Kind of helps give context in multiple ways.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, because for idealism, to me, that's more like, you know, the dream, what you're going towards, and how you're trying to enact that. So, you know, for me, the way I was talking about the obscure shadow of my nervous system and experience in my body being not as bright as I would love it to be, and I can turn my video on so you guys can see me. Or and so I can close my eyes. So my idealism is, or what I did to work on that in my life is I work with beauty and things that are pretty, like design, and I always like to make things feel good in my space, no matter where I am. I have an altar, and it brings me into that experience of I'm creating a good life for myself. I'm at least calling it in. I'm dreaming it up. I'm imagining it, and that's where I go with the meditations. I've gone around the world learning different kinds of meditations and gone to a lot of meditation retreat and ashrams, and I, you know, have my name is Padma Priya, given to me by Amachi, Amritananda Mahima, the hugging guru. She has the Nobel Peace Prize for helping people.
Yeah, Amir and I got hugged by her too. She's a great lady.
Yeah, I hung out with her for like 7 years. I you know, went to her ashram and did the rituals and stuff for 7 years in a row. And I had a whole family that we went there, and I never became a devotee because I'm more like I go and I like to explore a lot of things. So that was one of the explorations. And Padma Priya means lotus love. So it means coming from the darkness into the light and loving that path. And, you know, so the experiential realization when I was getting that name, I guess I can say that story alone is like, I basically, there was lotuses everywhere, and I wanted to be named Lotus. Like the ashrams are always designed differently or decorated differently every time. And I was like, and I meditated in the morning at the lotus pond, and I was like thinking, oh, how I would love to be called Lotus. Oh, but my friends told me I can't be called Lotus. Like I had already told friends I wanted to be called Lotus or Padma, and I didn't even know that there was Padme, and it was so weird. But then when I went to get the name, it's like you have to go through this whole ritual. You have to ask a few times. You arrive there at 5 a.m. You go through this whole group experience of how to go through it, and it's an initiation basically. And so I was with 5 people getting our names, and they all got their names at like, you know, by 10 o'clock in the morning, because Amma's hugging people all day, and we got there before she started even hugging. And then I was there until like 3 o'clock in the morning, still waiting for my name, like 15 hours later or something, something like that. Or like even dawn, 5 a.m. 20 hours later, and everyone was like, gosh, Amma doesn't usually stay this long. It's so interesting, so strange. And the whole time I was getting all the, like, I was like sitting there, why am I not getting named? You know, which is my obscurity and my darkness and my pain, you know, like from the nervous system. Why did they forget about me? And, you know, and I like, you know, I had asked you have to go through the initiation process of months and years to get the name. So, you know, I was sitting there, why did everyone get their name within the first 2 hours? And I'm waiting 20 hours or 15, however long it was, super long. And like, so I like went through this whole experience of like starting to listen to voices in my head. And I'm like, is Amma talking to me? And I felt like Amma was starting to talk to me, and she was like telling me to look around the hall, and she was telling me like to look at things, and I was starting to like recognize patterns that weren't my usual way of looking at patterns. And I couldn't believe it. Like, no, you everyone doesn't like me. I'm not supposed to be named. I'm just the bad person in this room. They forgot about me. I'm nobody. And like, that was all. And then it was like, well, maybe it was just like Amma making like talking to me, or my higher self talking to me in another way. So it was like a discovery of an internal voice or of a higher experience of being. And, you know, which isn't ideal, but I wouldn't allow myself to have that because of the society that I was brought in, and people telling me I'm crazy for hearing voices or seeing things or having visions. And in the end, I was sitting behind Amma, and I finally, it took me like hours to be like, should I ask one of the swamis, the guys in the yellow robes? Like it took me hours literally to be like, to get up the courage to ask one of the swamis, where's my name? Why didn't I get my name? You know? And like, I literally had to like, I think I can ask. And like, that's just kind of where I was in my life of, you know, fear of the world. And so I saw some lady, the lady literally like went in front of me, and the Swami was to my left, and I was afraid to talk to him on the back of the stage. And the lady like leaned over me, tapped him on the shoulder, and asked him the question. And I was like, oh, I can do that. So it's like coming into the realization of I can be this, you know, being that talks to people as well. And so I asked him, I said, I was supposed to get a name this morning, and I didn't get it. He said, oh, really? What happened? Or, I don't know. I just been waiting all day. And then he said, okay, I'll do something about it. And then a few moments happened, and then he tapped Amma on the shoulder from the back. She looked at him. He whispered into her ear, and then she looked over her shoulder behind. A bird just flew over me right now. How cute. Behind, and she like stared me in the eye and like looked right through me. And then I waited, and there's all this music, you know, when Amma's hugging, there's like all this like music, everyone's like da 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 da, you know, the Indian music and the kirtan and stuff. And then drumming, tabla. And so then I'm still waiting, and then the Swami goes to talk to her again, and then he writes something down on a piece of paper and turns around, swings around, looks at me, goes directly to me, and slaps a piece of paper into my hand. And at the same time as he slaps the piece of paper in my hand, the drums stop and Amma get up. It was all at the same exact time. It was like, you know, on beat. And then Amma left the hall. So, and it said Pama Priya. So basically I was going through from that whole moment of like darkness into the light. And so I guess, sorry, it's a little bit of a long story, but your microphone's on mute. But I can just say that that was an amazing experience that always helped me realize that I can come into the light, and that life is really has a rhythm and a beauty to it, and that I experienced part of it so profoundly when getting named by Amma.
That's really cool. I love that. That's maybe that's why I tend to rename them, because I think when I come up with the name, I try to come up with something that actually puts it in a way where you can immediately go into whatever the experience the words are describing. So experience or realization, I think you really kind of sort of demonstrated what it's like to reach down into a shadowy, obscure place and then just kind of hang there until this kind of it's until the ideal is reached, I guess you could say, which in this case would be your name and the acknowledgement and the initiation and stuff. But you really had to, it's kind of a perfect name too, because you really had to kind of be down in there for a long time. That would be a really long time to have to wait. I mean, it's amazing, yeah, that your mind only did that much. I'm betting there was probably a bit more to it in your actual experience. I'm
Oh,
sure
way
it was
more, way more.
I'm sure it was a grind, but that's perfect because then it finally got brought into that ideal space of what an ideal in this sense just means, the outcome is the one that you expected. It just took a long time and, or at least what you were hoping. So I think that's a really cool. I mean, the way you described it speaks for itself, experiential realization. So you realize something out of that experience from such a long time ago that you're able to share with us now. So I think that's kind of cool. So
And I just want to say that the reason why is because some lady came in, saying, I'm going to get a name. I'm going to get a name. I'm going to get a name. And she wasn't like a part of our group at all getting the names. And and so Alma named her determination. And I it took me so long to realize what happened, because I wasn't there like believing in myself at the time or being able to connect the dots and no, it couldn't be that, but it is that.
Yeah, so it's really nice. I like the way this the gift space is happening. It's like Nancy sort of tapped into it and opened it, and then you kind of just dived in and sort of really gave a very good sort of demonstration of what the gift is about, the experiential realization. So nice, very nice.
You're on mute again, Darmendra. We didn't hear you. Just
I just said who would like to go next. Oh shit. I'd like to. Is it helpful to keep this up, or would people rather see each other? Just curious. I mean, I can keep it up for a while longer, especially for people who are looking at this later through YouTube, who can just take a moment to kind of read it. Hopefully, they can see all of that.
Just for design wise, it'd be cool if you had two systems going, one that had like the basic, well, we can talk about it, but just you can have the basic names and then the codes, and then people can always look through it when they're that'd be cool design wise.
Yeah, true. Well, we'll have to work that out then, because I think that would be great too. Anyway,
Yeah.
I think for now, let me see. Tim, can you let me know? Were you able to read all of that? Because if you are, I'm gonna take it off the screen now. So because I like seeing the people.
He said no need, but I'm seeing you. Oh, he said no need for it, and plus I sent it to him in WhatsApp. That's how he got the link. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, you sent the whole thing with the theme and everything?
Yeah, what you sent.
Yeah. Okay, great. But I kind of want it's kind of nice to have it up there for a little while, but now I'm gonna come back to that so I can see everybody again. Oh, okay, I see. I couldn't see the chat thing when I had my screen. So I did. Yeah, cool. But anyway, just to that probably help you tune in a bit more. Evan, is there anything you'd like to share about?
Yeah, I'll just share like my understanding of this specific life code, just because, yeah, I'm a little confused tuning into the idealism part, but maybe that's the point of the obscuration. But I guess I'm just thinking of when I first started learning about Buddhism, and they started with saying how there's all these different obscurations to enlightenment, things that are going to obscure the path to enlightenment. It's about like dropping those away or integrating them. What I've realized, certain things that certain things that used to be obscure to me. It was like, it's like becoming aware of them ends up leading to this. I'm able to actually experience the obscuration outside of it rather from within it, because then I can see it in the world. But first I have to like pass through it in myself, and until I do that, I'm not going to be able to experience it out in the world and see it as this this little like this little idea or something that crops up every now, like a different wildflower that just, oh, I see it over there in the grocery store, or oh, I see it with my family. But like I feel like first I really have to recognize it in myself before I can all of a sudden start to experience it. But I think that's also why sometimes it's uncomfortable to work through these shadows, is because I know it's like, okay, once I notice it myself, this is also going to come with, now I might be better at noticing it in the outside world too. And sometimes that can feel like a burden. I know initially in my kind of at the start of my spiritual experience, it was like a big truckload on me when I feel like all of a sudden I started noticing things in myself that I was seeing out in the world. But ultimately then it becomes this like, it's kind of like a world of ideas, and we're constantly playing with them and throwing them around. And the more that you clear up, I feel like I've been able to, I don't know, like I feel like I can get to work or something. I can enjoy working with something in real life now that it's out of the shadows.
Cool, thanks, Evan. And what you said sort of sparked me. Yeah, the thing about you were mentioning about Buddhism, it's called the obscurations to omniscience, and then it's really interesting because then I thought about the what are called the perfections, the bodhisattva, the practice of the perfections of the bodhisattva, and those are all basically and they're ways of getting out of the obscurations to omniscience. They're ideal ways of being, and they have to do with generosity and ethical discipline and patience and diligence and concentration and awareness. And then there's those are the standard 6, but then some systems give 4 more, which are skillful means, aspiration, prayer, and wisdom. And so those are all like they're your things you rely on. And so you're always shooting for practicing any situation that can allow you to practice that ideal. And it's interesting how it starts with generosity, because really, if you truly have wisdom and it's something that can benefit all, you should just share it. And maybe eventually at some point somebody will come along and share something with you that allows you to do that in a way where that just becomes what you do if you really stick with it. But it doesn't really matter if that happens or not. The point is to share it because it benefits everybody. And it just whoever comes across anything like, especially those practice of the perfections, it can only benefit. And it only takes you out of the obscurations, because it's just the way. Those are literally the 10 main tools. I think at this point that's expanding, but through the time of 2,500 years ago when Buddha was around to now, I'm sure that it was a very different world than the one we're in now. And I think those were just really powerful, ideal ways of being with others in the world, because a bodhisattva is always about the other. It's always about helping the other. It's always about relieving the suffering of sentient beings, and it's always for the benefit of all beings. And that's the whole approach of the bodhisattva. And so, so thank you for your sharing. That kind of reminded me of that what is ideal, and and the obscuration to omniscience. That's why it's nice to have. That's why I always love it. We come together in a group because somebody will say something like that and it'll trigger a whole memory of stuff that I, in my experiential realization of, there was a period of time where I really became interested in the essential thread that was going through the whole Buddhist transmission, and discovered a lot of incredible things that were very useful in just like this thing you just shared. Let's see. You know what? I'll go out on a limb, and I know you're just listening, Tim, but if you feel like anything that you might want to share from your own experience about experiential realization, feel free to. If not, no problem. Anything to do with what is ideal in your life or in the world right now as a result of everything that's happening. But it's just an invitation. You certainly don't have to. In your first time, I don't expect, unless you really get a hit. So I'll give it a moment if you feel like it. If not, we're going to go to the sit-up.
Sure. I think, I guess what comes up for me is like how much realization or like creation, just like, making meaning, creating meaning, it's a kind of a collective process, and it does take like idealism to do that, like kind of stepping outside of what we consider to be the real, and playing with the borders of the possible and the potential, and how much wider that range really is. And I guess being in obscurity, it's often like being kind of lost in those ideas being unattainable, like the ideal being unattainable, and then being kind of fearful because of that, and kind of wanting to protect those ideals instead of sharing them. But as one begins to share those realizations, well, as those ideals become shared, they actually become realizations, because when you share them, you realize that they're actually held in the collective, and that as soon as they're kind of unleashed, then they manifest in the collective sentiment and the collective experience. And I've definitely gone through that journey where I've felt like somehow scarcity and abundance are tied to ideas, because that's, it's very strong for me. The 11th key is like a big one that's in my chart, and both in terms of making fictions and coming up with ideas of how the world could be, and having to basically coming out of obscurity means like letting go of those and just realizing you're activating the collective potential of those ideas. And that's how you can realize, like, once you kind of allow that to be, and even detach from the ideas being a reality that connects directly with you, but when you embrace it as something that it makes it possible that in another timeline or another future or another person's reality that thing could become real, then you're kind of finding like the light and kind of just continuing to go towards that as part of the journey.
Wow. Well, I like that contribution. Thank you. That brings out a whole aspect of it that is very user-friendly in the collective, and how it manifests through the collective, and the benefit that's there in the collective. And with that, and with the bodhisattva perfections, I think will be a good time to step into the siddha space. And in the gene keys, it's called lights, but I like to stretch that out a bit and call it light pictographs. So anyway, without getting into too much explanation, because the siddhas are really important to actually step into and embody. So I'm just going to take a moment and do what a little process that I do, which I call opening space to the higher and asking for help from above. That the 11th siddha of the essence of light pictographography. Just made up a new term. Just becomes a direct realization through the presences in this space right now. And so what I just did in opening the space like that is that we are basically a 5-faceted gem that is going to entertain a higher form of intelligence. And that's what we always do in the siddha space. We all become through our bellies. Now we shift from the heart, the gift, into our bellies, so that now it becomes universal. So we share with all of the universal life force and life experience. In the heart, it's obviously, the gift is about the collective. The mind is about yourself and your own struggle with your own obscurity. But now that we step into the universal, we see that there is a vast reservoir of information that's stored in what are called light pictographs. And light pictographs are kind of like source emanations of different aspects of reality. And in the way we're dealing, you could even see all of the 64 gene keys as a different archetype. Because one of the things you can do, and this is the metaphor of Indra's net, where it's a net made of infinite mirrors, and every mirror is capable of reflecting all the other mirrors, and at the same time of being reflected in all the other mirrors. So at this point, from the view of the 11th gene key, what we're seeing is that we're in a field of 64 archetypes right now, and on a universal level, those are being emanated from the source as what are called light pictographs. And a light pictograph, it looks like a beautiful kind of like a painting that you can actually step into an interface with, and every object in that light pictograph has an incredible depth of experiential realization just by coming into contact with it. And you do that by coming into contact with it with your consciousness, but it's the consciousness as it centers through your totality. So you have to connect into it through your center, through your belly, through your being. So right now I'm just going to tap into that right now, and instead of focusing on any one archetype, it's that this is the gene key of archetypes as it is. So I'm going to tap into the essence of what a light pictograph is and what an archetype is. And it's really weird, because then what I realize as I let that flow over me and wash over me is I realize I'm an archetype, I'm an expression, I'm a light pictograph. And so are we all. And each one of us is a highly condensed formation of consciousness and energy. And all 64 archetypes that's what our genes are. And we are a light pictograph of 64 different archetypes. So the incredible richness of information that is contained in a human being is incredible. And so the essence of the archetype is to touch whatever archetype you're in. Again, if you connect into your belly right now, and you'll sense there's a thing that's going on there, and they're like emanations. If you can kind of just really softly drop into just below your belly where your heart is, and just kind of extend very softly out in front of that space, you'll start to catch this sort of wave, even though it's not exactly a wave, and it's kind of a weave, even though it's not exactly a kind of weave. But when you start to feel a certain, like you're getting clicked into something, then you're connected with emanations. And all you need to do with your intent is say, take me, with your intent, you don't even have to say it, you just have to intend that, take me to the source of all archetypes. To what is the archetype of archetypes? Because that's what this 11th gate at the siddha level is the essence of what archetype is. So take a moment and let that shift occur, because we're kind of, if everybody's with me right now and you're kind of feeling that movement through space, we're actually doing the beginning of what a very rudimentary form of what's called macro dimensional voyaging, which is riding the lines of awareness, the filaments of awareness that connect your being, your center, to the source. And if you tap into that and you just let go and say, take me, you can literally ride back to that place. In this particular case, with this gene key of the source of what archetyping is as an emanation. And it's truly the storehouse. It's really it's that facet of existence that allows things to be what they are in the form of a very highly condensed, meaningful package of living wisdom that's there and available at all levels, at all scales, for all types of appropriately corresponding life forms and planetary atmospheric conditions, whatever is needed. And that's something you can just really experience down in your being right now, in your belly, because there is something, as I've tapped into that, there is movement and there is actually information feeding us through direct awareness through the belly. There's a different kind of communication that comes directly through your belly, and it experiences by shifts and movements and flows and very interesting way that the belly thinks is different. It doesn't go through thoughts. It goes through a very, 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 very sophisticated, very, very highly differentiated subtleties of movement is really how it communicates. And that can have pressure and temperature and speed and timing and all kinds of things in it. But it's just getting us right now to get the sense of what it's like to listen from our being, from our belly, from our hara, because that can tap us into that source of the very existence of archetype and what is the essence of it. And if you step into that, you can also, at this moment, because we're very close to the source of that right now, you can also feel yourself, what it feels like to be an archetype, what it is to be you, that is an archetype. So that would be like the most quintessentialized wisdom of the essence of yourself, because that's what your archetype is. That's the everything that you've experienced and realized, all as a nectar, as the most profound gathering of, just like a bee with honey, the most profound gathering of your higher self. And your higher self, our higher selves, it's funny, we talk about it like it's something different, but it is really the most real of what we are, is always in touch with that. The higher self is always in touch with all of the siddhas. So at this point, it's also good to acknowledge that through the essence of what archetype is right now, your higher self and you now have a channel that's open. Because another thing about working with the deep essence in this way, it never forgets. So there'll come a situation in the future where you need to tap into this archetype space, and you'll be surprised to know that you'll be sharing it with somebody, and you'll be coming from this kind of space to do it, because it's open now for you to do so. And all you have to do to even make it more real is to share your own experience of the essence of archetype now, because I'm going on silent.
I really like how you have shifted it from light to light pictograph, because I never would have interpreted this as the archetype of archetypes, and I've never actually even thought of that. Like, what is the archetype of an archetype? But the minute you brought that up, it totally takes me into this this weird, this like interesting space of where when I become aware of the fact that I myself am embodying an archetype and that everyone else is, there's something really like freeing about that, because it's no longer for me, it seems almost ridiculous to compare myself to other people and to judge myself compared to other people, when we are all living through and at different stages in these archetypal stories and these archetypal emanations. And it just seems like we're all just like a bunch of different flowers blooming. It's like we're not all trying to be the same flower. It's like, and now I just feel like I can't wait for this to come up again, for this to come in my mind at some large gathering in the future, and just get a look out at all these like blossoming archetypal flowers emanating. I don't know. I love this one.
Nice. I like the. I felt like you're really tapped into it, and just by the way you were looking around, you see when you're in a acidic space and you really get it. There's just it's not like there's not enough. It's almost like there's too much information. So it's like, how do you navigate that, and which parts of it do you describe, and how do you actually tap into it, and then just share what from that space, whatever wisdom you have. So yeah, it's. Yeah, and the other thing is just, you brought up another beautiful point, is that have you ever really sat and been with a person and literally penetrated into their presence and their space and experienced their archetype and experienced them as the archetype they are, just as they are? There's the depth, the literal depth of possibilities in an experiential realization just in one human being. They're a whole universe. We're each a whole universe. So we're really, to really let the cat out of the bag, we're talking about the microcosmic archetype, if we're talking, because that's really all we can talk about is ourselves. And when we go back to that source and we tap into the archetype of archetypes, that is the human archetype, it's the universe. In the smallest form a universe can get before it's no longer a universe. We're like the smallest thing the universe can pack itself into. Anything smaller and it loses some aspect of its totality. So that's another little juicy bit of it, and it kind of what you were sharing, kind of, because as you were tapping into all the information, I sort of tapped into it with you. There's a lot of, that's amazing when you get into Siddha space, because where we are right now is in the terms of the Merkaba vehicle, we're in our omega sphere, which is like 50 feet in every direction all around us. It's a huge sphere. And that sphere works by anything that comes into the space, it merges with the truth of it. And so right now we're merging with the truth of archetype. And as we do that, we discover the archetype of the human is the microcosm, the smallest, most compact, dense, condensed universe there is. Holofractal representation of the totality. So cool. So thank you, Evan, that brought that out.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Love it. Yeah, so I can speak from the experience of that everything all in one, the whole of totality. I'm actually working on a campaign that I call the potential for totality. And so I love that you're always talking about totality. It's perfect because, and you speak my language in so many ways, and I'll tell you more about that later. But the point about the city and the light and the archetypes, when I go into the belly and feel the wave, and it reminds me of how my interdimensional embodiment can be connected to all, and the bliss of that, and the way that my embodiment actually integrates that information is so beautiful, of the infinite of potential that this body can experience. But it's like coming through time and space and form in my own body, so I feel little bits here and little bits there, and I'm working through my meditations on expanding that reality and coming out of the obscurity and into the realization of the gift of life, and then into, from there, the light of my total experience, which is where
all my nadis and my chakras, all my energy centers and my entire nervous system can be in a state of an experience of joy, bliss, love, gratitude, all the full spectrum rainbow, and including all the colors that we can't see with the human eye, and all the feelings that we could ever have, is the expansion of the potential experience of humanity. I think that's the evolution of being able to be more than what we recognize now, and that's like the holographic experience of the body, the light body, the way it feels like an undulating light, like fractals, crystals. It's just like when I get into that space, I feel like I'm departiculating. And I actually did that a lot when I was a kid. I called it feeling like a wave. No, it was first feeling like a rock, then a wave, and then my entire consciousness would zip. They would undulate. Like I would literally feel like I was doing this, but I knew I was just laying in my bed, and then it would zip into my third eye, and then I'd hearing like a really loud ringing sound. You know, I can't do it, but and then, you know, I mean that I later on in adulthood, I realized that that's the out of body experience. And so I went interdimensional, and I would also fly into walls and things would melt, and I would stare at candles, and I was just the trance girl. You know, I thought I levitated, and dream worlds were so real to me. So the interdimensional experience of life is that the potential for totality that we can have as human beings, and the expansion. And also I've had experiences where I feel like I'm a sun, where I'm just, everything is, you know, just every single ray from the point of one dot, ray, like splaying out completely. And you know, it's like I can go into that dimension. I don't, but and I can also go into other dimensions of like just being a dot, and things like that. So I think there's a lot more that we can be in this human body, and that we're expanding and evolving the archetypes, and the ability for this embodiment through the evolution to actually experience the feeling of it. I think that's the evolution, is being able to experience it through form and become the archetypes. Oh yeah, and being a designer, similar to Tim, I also design interfaces. So I look at how we can come into these awesome realities of embodiment through design of technology. We Are the Technology. That's going to be my YouTube channel. Either We Are the Technology or The Technology of Self is the podcast that I've been working on developing and making. So, and it's going to use the potential for totality in there and all this information. You'll be interviewed.
Back to where you started from, totality. That was a good trip all the way around. You were mentioning the thing about the third eye that's called, in the Taoist system, it's called the mysterious pass. And once you can break through that, then you have interdimensional capabilities. So that was a good description of that, how you actually can do that. And then you were describing different dimensions you access, and that in Carlos Castaneda's books, he calls that shifting or movements of the assemblage point, where we normally assemble perceptions in our auric field, makes it so we see the world the way we do, and it's through unconscious common consensus that everybody maintains this view of the world. The minute you shift that agreed upon position into other positions, you assemble your perceptions, your perceptual capacity in a way that can perceive wholly different worlds. The real trick is to always maintain the first attention, this one, and then go into all the other possibilities of the second attention, which you're describing, while staying in the first attention. Because when you could do that, you link all that up to this world, and then you get a very powerful feed through. And one other thing I wanted to say that came up in what you were sharing is the three different levels of how you can apply this information. In the beginning, with your archetypes, it's about how you were imprinted at birth. So you've got a certain number of planets that imprinted, and that activates certain centers in you. And so everything you see, even if we go through all these siddhas and all their different archetypes, you always see it through whatever whatever center of gravity you might be in your life's work, which is your personality sun, or you might be in your evolution, which is your personality earth, or wherever you are. But then everything you see is colored through that particular position that you're looking from. When you shift into the collective, it's different, because then you learn how to trade positions with another person. So I can literally step into another person's shoes and experience the siddha from their perspective, which may be very different than from my perspective. And then when you step into the universal, like we're doing now with the siddhas, then it's not about, then all the keys are there and available, and you can take it from any position, but then you start stepping it out into bigger and bigger scales, which means richer and deeper and more profound levels of intelligence that you start tapping into, and then you start to see them from that perspective. So that just to kind of give a backdrop to what happens when you're just in your own space subjectively, is that everything's going to get colored by your imprinting. But that's why it's so powerful to work in a group like this, because not only can the energy of the group help spin you into looking at it from everybody from different perspectives, but it can also, from the energy of the group, we can attract a universal presence, and we can start to see it from one particular, how, you know, a way bigger, more expanded sense of consciousness experiences what we're looking at. So that's just to kind of give a little bit of a deeper contextualization of what's possible when we're working these spaces. This archetypal one is very rich because it's all about ideation. And ideation is about, it's kind of like what happens when creative imagination goes through your brain and comes out your left eye, and what you see as a result of that. And that's literally what happens physically, but you know, because it has to cross over too, because it has to come from the right brain over into the left eye. So that's kind of interesting, because that's where the crisscross occurs. So in that crisscross, there's this process that happens. Anyway. Just an incredible amount of information there. Who else would like to tap into the siddha, if you like?
I have a bit of a vignette. I don't know if it it's more expressionist, I guess, but this morning, so I got invited to the call this morning, the Awakened Synergy Mastermind call, which basically starts at 11:11, and then coincidentally, a friend of mine who's working on a protocol for love invited me to a call about his project that was also starting at 11:11 on this day of the where we're talking about the 11th gate. And I ended up listening to both kind of, and had Denise's, our group in the left ear for about 30 minutes, and then the other group in the right ear, and was kind of listening to both. And I took notes on in my notebook with the left page on the left side and then the right page on the right side on both things at the same time, and was kind of doing this cross thing where I was seeing these, like trying to see the dualism patterns as a whole. And so then I just had that opened up. But I was thinking about a couple, I guess, archetypal media that I've experienced. And there's this really fascinating book by a Japanese science fiction author called The Sacred Era. And it's basically totally about this. It exists in a holographic universe, a version of the far future, but it unifies with the far past. And it's basically about like dualism as a hologram. And one of the main motifs is that Bosch painting, the Hieronymus Bosch painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights, which is a triptych which has, you know, heaven and hell, and then the earthly delights in between. And that's what came into my mind for many reasons. But I found that book in in San Francisco, and it was very obscure. It's written in the 70s, but it's totally transcendent, like far beyond anything anybody was thinking about for decades, I felt. And I think a ton of things have come from that book. But I didn't finish reading it until after the first time I engaged in an ayahuasca ceremony. And when I engaged in an ayahuasca ceremony, I had this incredible experience where after speaking with the archetypes of my divine self and speaking with David Bowie for a while, I went into this kind of painting world that you described, and was, just walking around in it, and the color and the texture, like just kind of light as a texture. It's so hard to describe. But at the fire later that night, I was speaking to another participant in the ceremony, and he had also gone into the same painting. So we spoke about that for quite a while. And then I ended up finishing this book about the Bosch painting. And it had been kind of out of my mind for a couple of months, but the ceremony, all those times were in Berlin, but I'm back here in San Francisco, and I go to the building that used to be a church, and there's a kind of cryptocurrency, new economy gathering happening, and a ton of people that I really love are there. And the big centerpiece of one area of this church is a kind of like spoof of this Garden of Earthly Delights painting, which is San Francisco themed and has like all, hippies and hackers and all of the different things like going on in the painting. But it's like it's just basically a variant on that Bosch painting. And it was huge and impressive, and just totally kind of a display of all these archetypes in this room, like just, dressed beautifully and engaging with beautiful words and everything, but still exemplifying the full range of humanity and the full range of expression of the archetypes in both the light and the shadow elements. So that was the story that crossed through my mind, considering this city.
Wow, cool. Thanks for sharing. This is this is probably the best city space I've tapped into yet, with everybody really feels like is stepping into it and nailing it. So that's yummy. Cool. It inspires me to also, as you were sharing, Tim, it inspired me to say also that this ladder of shadow gift siddha, it leads somewhere. And once you have enough siddha experience under your belt, and enough of your adamantine rainbow body, which is your corpus Christi, so you do the math. Anyway, your adamantine rainbow body of light, once enough of that has been lit up, we can literally step out of that and into the real world, where we start tapping into what are called chambers of the labyrinth of creation. And they are occupied by different really super high evolutionary whole light beings, if you want to call it. I like that better than the word angels, because whole light beings includes everything from us to the source. And there's all kinds of other creatures that are heavens to Betsy, even way more radical than angels even. And all of those are part of what's possible in our Corpus Christi when we start to train in the 144 dimensions of samadhi. So eventually I'm hoping that I can work with a group of people who are ready to go into that. That was something I was exploring about 2.5 decades ago after my mystical death and rebirth. And that space, after working with the periodic table of the angels, in the sense of doing invocation of presence, where you invoke higher forms of intelligence into the room, and I used to call it sacred geometry prayer wheels. And depending on the geometry we had in the room would give us the specific way we would express whatever consciousness was coming through. But eventually that evolved into being able to go, not just to invite them into our world, but to learn how to do what's called, when you write the emanations and you start to learn how to do that, you can go into their world. And a lot of what you were describing, Tim, kind of reminded me of just in a kind of a distant echo of it, but still pretty accurate, of what different chambers and the qualities of chambers of higher dimensional beings are like, and what happens when you get there, and how your consciousness is infused with like about 10,000 times more information than you're used to, but because you're held in the space by those beings, you can totally handle it. And while you're in it, you totally get it. And it would take you lifetimes to even explain 1 minute of it, but it's really neat how you can start to access it. So what we're doing when we're training our shadows and gifts and siddhas is learning how to step up into that ladder and then eventually hold all of that at the same time open simultaneously, so we can start functioning in our adamantine rainbow body of light to start moving through the chambers of the labyrinth of the creation. And that's when we really can, because then you get into multi-dimensional combinations of siddhas plus things that are really outside of our range of verbiage right now, because we just don't have enough of experience of it in this world. But stuff to do with higher dimensional beings' ways of experiencing their higher consciousness, the higher aspect of their consciousness. So really, somehow, just what you were sharing, Tim, kind of made me want to sort of give a little window, a little peek into that. That this shadow gift siddha is really, even though it's very profound work, it's just a stepping stone to an even a deeper voyage that can open up. That soon I hope I can start doing, maybe in the Awaken Dream Synergy, and maybe we'll create another group. Denise and I are talking about that. Maybe we can create another group that's specifically about really, really sophisticated voyage. It's called voyaging, by the way. And in the sense of moving, and it's called macro-dimensional voyaging because each chamber is like a macro dimension, and it sustains the whole aspect of the creation. And when you use the word angel and you say like Mikael, it's not just one being. It's a whole, like human beings. They're Michael beings. They're across the whole of existence. There's as many of them as, if not more, than as like us humans. So every type of angel has zillions of them, and they're a whole class of beings. So when we say something like Gabriel, it's a whole class of Gabriel beings that all have unique names, just like we do. We're not all called human being. We all have unique names. Anyway, interesting diversion there, just for fun, just to kind of open a window into what's possible the deeper we go into this. And I just wanted to kind of open that up for a sec. And I just wanted to ask Nancy if she has anything she'd like to contribute as we're getting to the end here of the siddha space.
Well, thank you. I just found it fascinating when you said, when we talk about an archangel like Gabriel, that it's not like just one being, but it's many beings or a cluster. It just sounds fascinating, because I know that these, archangels can be with billions of people at once. So thank you.
Yeah, quite an archetype, that one, isn't it? Boy, is that not an archetype? And there are also archetypes too, higher archetypes. That's why I mentioned it also, because each higher dimensional consciousness that occupies a chamber of the labyrinth that's responsible for the manifestation and maintenance of some aspect of creation is also an archetype. It's a kind of archetype that we don't even realize. And it's a class of being. When we say Gabriel, it's a class of being, just like human being or dog or cat or worm or tree. Gabriel is a class of being. You have to think of it like that. It's describing a whole species of higher dimensional intelligence that populates the whole creation. They're all across the creation. There may not be as many of them as there are of us, because they're kind of a more rarefied and much more, stepped up form of consciousness. But they're a class of being, and just like all the other. If eventually, when we start getting into the periodic table of the angels and the 144 dimensions, there's 144 different classes of being, all just above human, that take us all the way back to the source. So that's really when it starts to get interesting, because then you discover the existence you're part of, not just from the point of view of on the earth here, where we seem to be like, at least in the visible sense, the radicalist form of being. And unfortunately, we're really abusing that. Maybe not us, but definitely there's a lot of an extremely large amount of unconsciousness going on this planet. But it's really fascinating when you start to realize you're maybe just at the lowest end of the totem when it comes to relating to the source and all the types of beings that populate existence between us and the source in terms of consciousness. And it's a gas to experience. That's all I can say. It's like if I were to invoke the presence of, let's say I wanted to invoke the presence of, I mean, we'll just take another minute if everybody's here for at least a minute more. I'll just for fun, I'll if I can find it easy enough, we'll tap into something here, and I'll show you something that's really kind of cool. Please tell me it's here somewhere. Oh no, I know where it is. Here we go. Because if you've never seen this, it's kind of a trip to look at. And I'll just share it because I mentioned it, and it's worth taking a peek at. But this is the periodic table to angels. And this is just like the periodic table of the elements, but it's angels. So it's at the upper end, not the bottom end of matter. It's at the top end of light. These are all their names. So whatever the little two thing is, these are the names over here. And this comes from an enlightened being who basically had all six. When I say enlightened, I'm talking about a being that had all 64 siddhas accessible, because you can't use the word enlightenment until has all of their genetics has been lit up. That's what enlightenment means. It's all lit up. And this was he had a series of what are called secret talks. He's also published regular books out in the world. His name is Gurdjieff, Russian mystic. He's the one who brought the Enneagram from the Sufis into the public consciousness. And the way he did it was that it's all about transformation of substances up and down the scale. It's not about typing. That was Oscar Icazo and other people who did that later. And it's kind of a degradation of the original use of the Enneagram. But when you know how to use the Enneagram correctly to speed up and slow down vibrations in terms of consciousness and emotions and other things, then you can start to learn to tap into, in group spaces, these angelic presences. And so that's a lot of fun. And I was just going to go into the eighth one right now, just for fun. And I'll just do something so you guys get a taste of this, because I just feel like we're in archetypes. So I think it's a valid. So RZ is Raziel. Raziel, some of you may have heard of. So when I invoke the presence of Raziel, which is a throne consciousness, and throne consciousnesses tend to have seats associated with them that looks like a royalty would sit on. But what happens instead, and this one is of a deep violet, and it's kind of surrounded by a silver and golden edging around it. And anyway, what thrones do is they, around thrones congregate all kinds of, just like in a throne in the world, congregate all kinds of beings. So throne energies are like a very highly refined and way more sophisticated version of an angel than a standard angel, because you're stepping it up from an archangel to a principality to a virtue to a power to a domination to a throne. But at a very simple level. It's not a very sophisticated level yet. The deeper you go, the higher the number, the more profound the conscious experience of the angelic presence is. An angel is just a way of generalizing. They're really not. I shouldn't be calling all of, even though we use the word angels, it's just a way to indicate of something of a higher form of intelligence. They're really, each one is unique, and each one is, like I said, a whole class of beings. So we're tuning into the consciousness field of Raziel right now. And the way you do that, the way you tune into angels, is you basically, between the 8th and 9th chakra above us, up above our head, is a tetrahedron. And that tetrahedron funnels in any form of higher dimensional consciousness you want. It goes straight through that tetrahedron, and it's a beam of light that goes right down through the center of you. The minute you can establish that through your intent and say, because it's there, all you have to do is see it and realize it, you'll start to have direct contact with whatever, any one of these angels you want. And as you start to do that, and you'll feel it, it'll immediately go down into your root chakra and kind of create a sort of opening there that lets you know, and what it's doing is it's going down through your feet and grounding down into the earth. And that means you're basically the transformer now for that consciousness. So it's coming through you now, Raziel. And it helps to say the name sometimes, because the very pronunciation of the name is also the expression of the creative word that it is, that's expressed at the beginning of creation, that gives it the power to be what it is as an archetype. And hence that's why we could step it up here through the siddha of archetypes into the dimension of Raziel as an archetype, which is literally and if you just notice how your body changes in its breathing, if you want to notice your belly too, and notice if there's any sense, there's a very how should I say, it's kind of an internal opening into a kind of very pregnant stillness. It's like a stillness, but it's a stillness that's very full of an ebullient energy. An ebullient energy of appreciation. Appreciation for everything that comes around the throne. Because there's all types of entities that come around a throne consciousness. And a throne consciousness is about, at the higher dimensions, it's about serving. Instead of being served, it's about serving. So a throne consciousness serves many different types of beings in creation. And the essence in the belly is about appreciation for the many different types of consciousnesses that frequent the throne energy at the level of Raziel, which is not too far away from our human dimension. It's only the 8 angel. By the time you get to 103, you're basically right up next to the source, whereas 8, we're only 8 steps away from a human consciousness. So it's still a lot very, there's a sense of familiarity in certain ways, but there's also a sense of things being very refined, very pristine. Anytime you tap into an angel, there's always that sense of refinement, pristine, purity, almost like hearing a pin drop. Even when there's noise, it still has that sense of an empty chamber. That in which creation can happen, because they're all created beings. So those are some of the things you can tap into. And I'm actually, the reason I'm getting so much information is because I'm going in and questioning my own experience and getting answers instantly. I'm just not verbalizing that process. I'm just verbalizing the answers, and that's how I'm able to share with you some of the qualities of Raziel. And because otherwise, if we got into it in any other way right now, it would take too long, and we're toward the end of the meeting. And I just wanted to give you guys a taste. Yes, Nancy, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I just had this question, when I think about the table of elements, those are all the elements that actually make up life and our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering that we come, I feel like we come from those realms. And are these table of elements of angels, is this what we're made up of also?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
It's just so fascinating, because I know physically we're stardust, but obviously we're not, who we are in our essence, we're not physical beings.
Yeah.
And when I was really young and I was searching for meditation, I remember I had this very, very clear longing, this drive to go home. And I knew my home was not in this world. And I just knew it. And so I've always, been drawn to stuff like this. And this blows me away, this table. So thank you.
Yeah, it blew me away the first time I saw it too. It's at the end of a book called The Hidden Work. It's all about how to use Enneagram and other very profound symbologies and processes to work this table and how to do this table. I'm leaving out a lot of details, and I'm just going right in and doing it because I've been working with it for about 2.5 decades. But yeah, so I just want to give you guys a little taste of it, just how that might be, and hopefully, if anything, you got the sense of the pristineness and the purity and the kind of clear mirror emptiness that exists in these higher dimensional spaces. And that goes for all the angels. There's always that sense of purity, because there is no downside. You've already gone through the siddhas, so you've already passed through what's called the non-dual space, where it's kind of like love without an opposite. It's either love or it's neutral. There is no opposite. And so the minute you step into this table of the angels, that's where you're starting from. Love that has no opposite, and going up from there. And how that's applied, which is another way to look at. We'll get into that another time. I'm going to stop the share for now. But it won't be the last time I do that, because now that I've opened that up a little bit with people who are a little more consistent now, and people who, even if they're rather newer, they've proven to me without a doubt that they can handle and absorb this kind of information. And Tim is, of course, Raziel and oxygen. So isn't that interesting? Because yeah, you could do the correspondences in that way too, and you will find interesting correspondences there. And what's even more interesting is you could put every single one of us in terms of the shadow gift siddha. Now you say there's only 64, but this table has inner octaves that open up. There's the outer octave, which if you were in my, let's see, okay, I'll have to save that for another time because not everybody was in that meeting. But all I'll say is the difference between the 64 and 104 or whatever it is that there's certain areas in the octaves where inner octaves open up. And that's what happens when you go into higher scales, lower scales, doesn't matter. So there's a lot of things being shown there that would be like subharmonics of a siddha that would be somewhere between two siddhas with a slight, I guess you could say, what would be the word? I don't want to say, a differentiation in unusual ways that open up when you start to get into more sophisticated, how to call it, density of information, where your information gets really compact. Then the octaves bifurcate and they open up and create new octaves that are within the octaves that you're already working in. That's kind of very, it's almost obscure to even say it like that. It's much better if we actually would experience it. But anyway, because people are going to say, that, well, there's only 64 gene keys and there's 104. Well, yeah, well then you need to study up on enneagrams and other things and see how octaves work, is all I can say, because there's, can I send everybody that angel chart? Only, yeah, actually, I do have your, yeah, I have your email. Sure. Yep. I'll have to make a note and remember that. Now I'll remember. Nancy wants a copy of the angel chart. Okay. But I can also tell you this, if you're interested in the book, that can give you a handle on also a lot of little details. Of course, you can keep coming to these meetings, and eventually I'll show you how to work this, which is the quickest shortcut way.
I probably won't read it. I kind of decided to have a moratorium on buying any more books.
Oh, okay. Then yeah, we'll just I'll just pass that on to you through your email. Okay, and I think that was a nice ending.
Just so you know.
Oh, okay. Well, here I'm just gonna write. I'm gonna put it in the chat. The name of the book and the author. You can get it on Amazon. And hang on a sec. I'm a terribly slow typist, so be patient with me. The Hidden Work by E.J. Golds, and at the back of that book is the tables. And that's a good book to read. If you're not real familiar, it's very, very deep into enneagrams and stuff in ways that might surprise you and confabulate you. So if that happens, I'm always available for questions and stuff. But that's the book out of which the fold out at the end of it is that angelic tables you just saw. So that's a very, very powerful, and like I say, it's easy to get on Amazon. It's been around since the early 90s. So unless anybody else has anything else they might want to share, I'm going to stop recording now. Oops.